On behalf of the Coralville Optimist Club, I want to welcome all of you here today. This is the 6th annual Service Club dinner at which the President of the University of Iowa has reported to us. I think that we could call it a traditional annual affair. The speaker today has stood at the helm of this great University of Iowa since the year 1940. And I think all of us in this room know and appreciate that he has guided it well. He has guided it well these past 24 years. Knowledgeable people tell us that the knowledge of man has doubled twice in so far what has been my generation. Now, to me, this is an awesome fact. Yet, when I consider the fact that I myself went to a one-room school and was the only child in class through the 8th grade and did my homework by the light of a kerosene lamp, it doesn't seem too surprising, especially when you think of the fact that people today claim their children are doing their homework by the light of the TV tube. I think that we realize how important knowledge is and how important it is in the tradition of this country. In fact, the first president of our country, George Washington, in a message to Congress on January 8, 1790, had this to say: "Knowledge is, in every country, the surest basis of human happiness. Therefore, all of us are vitally concerned in hearing today a report on the University of Iowa from its very capable and distinguished president, Virgil Hancher."
Mr. Chairman, there's a TV character who, in response to applause like this, says, "How sweet it is." Well, presidents get applause, and sometimes they don't get applause, so I always take the applause when it comes. Members of the service clubs, I think this is a good custom which we're following today. It is fitting that the president of the university should appear before you once a year to speak on matters affecting the university which are of mutual concern or interest. And I've never thought it necessary to limit these matters to those things of a general or popular type. I have assumed, and assumed rightly, that your concern in this community goes deeper than surface matters, and that you are interested in fundamental issues in American higher education, as well as of the particular place of the university in your city and in your state. For all of this, I am very grateful, and I hope that this excellent custom will be continued for many years to come. Usually what I've had to say on this occasion has been subsumed under the title, "The State of the University and the University of the State." But today, for reasons which will be apparent, I've given it a slightly different title, in quotes, "The Summing Up." Perhaps you will forgive a few reminiscences on this occasion, because my memories of this community go back almost 50 years to September 1914, when I entered the university as a freshman in the College of Liberal Arts. The First World War had broken out in Europe only a few weeks before, a war which covered us with horror and surprise, but which at first did not seem intimately bound up with our welfare and our concerns. My arrival on this campus was not a particularly auspicious one. In those days, one traveled to and from Iowa City by train, the Rock Island or the Krandik. A high school classmate and I left our hometown in northwestern Iowa early on a September morning in 1914, bound for Des Moines, where we were to transfer to the 4 p.m. Rock Island train for Iowa City. That train was scheduled to arrive in Iowa City at 8 p.m., and here we were to be met by a university medical student from our own hometown. At Grinnell, the train, in the unhurried fashion of trains in those days, stopped according to schedule so that the passengers might have a 20-minute interval for supper or sandwiches and coffee, there being no diner on the train. Before the 20 minutes were over, the passengers were driven back to their day coaches by a torrential rain, one of the worst I've ever seen. The train then moved out of Grinnell and proceeded eastward very slowly for several miles. Somewhat west of Brooklyn, Iowa, it came to a sudden and unpropitious stop in the middle of nowhere. We soon found that the track ahead of us had been washed out and that we would stay there until the track had been rebuilt. The needed reconstruction took most of the night. As a result, we arrived in Iowa City 12 hours late at 8 o'clock in the morning, unshaven, disheveled, tired and hungry, and without anyone at the station to meet us. This was my entrance to Iowa City. My teachers that freshman year were excellent. Clara May Daly in history, Mrs. Orner in freshman English composition, in freshman German, Edward Henry Lauer, who commented daily on the progress of the war in Europe and his concern. Lauer, who was later a dean at the University of Washington in Seattle. And in freshman physics, Lee Paul Sieg, later dean at the University of Pittsburgh and president of the University of Washington at Seattle. I've often wondered how many of today's freshmen have an equally distinguished assortment of teachers, either present or potential. But in other respects, my freshman year here was far from ideal and happy. There were no dormitories for men. There was no student union. There was no orientation. And there were few organized activities in which a freshman could participate. The freshman, unless he joined a fraternity, had his room in a private home or a rooming house, and he ate his meals at Youth's Inn or some other boarding house or restaurant. He might make friends through his classes or a church group, but by and large, he led a lonely life. One bright spot in that year was my acquaintance with John Ely Briggs, then a PhD candidate in political science, who roomed in the house at 403 North Lynn Street, where I had a room. John, who spent the rest of his life in our Department of Political Science, was one of the best friends that students of this university ever had. And out of the goodness of his heart, he, as a graduate student, took pity on a frightened freshman from a little country town, and he counseled me and guided me in many different ways into a successful academic year. Nevertheless, on balance, I remained dissatisfied, and at year's end, believe it or not, I had a transcript of my record sent to Northwestern University with the intention of transferring to that institution. It seems odd now that I should have chosen a university from which my wife later graduated and in whose home city, Evanston, I was to make my own home for more than a decade, and where our 3 children were born before we returned to Iowa City. But as June of 1915 faded into July, and July into August, and August moved toward September, I began to wonder about the few loyal friends I had made in my freshman year, particularly the members of the old Zedegathian Literary Society. Moreover, my father, who was a stubborn man, and from whom I am alleged to have inherited some characteristics, urged me to return to Iowa City for my sophomore year. And so when September came, I returned. And then began that love affair with the University of Iowa and with Iowa City, which has lasted down to the present day. Still, some days I have wondered how my life might have been changed if I had transferred to another university. The Iowa city to which I returned in the fall of 1915 had a population of about 12,000, exclusive of its small student enrollment. With that population, it was entitled to have and did have 12 saloons, one for every 1,000 people. Representatives of the Christian colleges of the state, in full Christian charity and brotherly love, of course, made much of that fact. It has been a matter of interest to me, therefore, that in recent days there have been transfer students from small colleges in this state and nearby states who have told me that one of the most noticeable changes in moving from their college to this university was the increase in the religious activities and influences to which they were exposed. Iowa City in 1914-15 was located largely on the east side of the Iowa River. A few daring souls, I think, were building houses in Manville Heights, and travel there was by trolley car by way of the Park Bridge or on foot. There were farmlands where the medical school and the university hospitals now stand. In fact, the university did not extend west of Madison Street, the street running north and southeast of this building, except for the engineering shops, the gymnasium and armory, and Fred Higbee will still, with a twinkle in his eye, will still refer to this building as the old men's gym. The building where the TV studio is now located, Old Iowa Field, and the stands on the east bank of the Iowa River. Schaefer Hall, McBride, Physics, Math, and North Hall, to use their modern names, had been built in the preceding 15 years by an annual millage tax which had been levied first in the late 1890s. University Hall, however, was still to be built. During World War I, as I suppose in all wars, building came to a standstill. The next surge in building came after that war during the administration of President Jessup, with the construction of University Hall, the transfer of the medical college and hospitals to the west side of the river, the construction of dormitories for men and women, the building of the Iowa Memorial Union, the art building, the theater, the field house, and the stadium. This basically, in its physical setting at least, was the university to which I returned on November 1, 1940. It was a larger university than I had known in my student days, and it had survived a deep depression. But the Depression syndrome still affected the people of Iowa, as it has continued to affect them until very recently. And in November 1940, we were within 13 months of Pearl Harbor. Not only are there many sharp contrasts between 1940 and 1964, but the intervening years have probably been the most turbulently responsive to external events of any equal number of years in the university's history. In 1940, the university's student enrollment was 6,667. It was 12,923 last fall, an increase of 93%. The enrollment of the university has almost doubled, but this tells only a part of the story. For note what happened in the years between 1940 and 1964. We moved from 6,667 students in 1940 to 3,183 in 1943, less than half of the 1940 enrollment. From that level, we moved to 4,744 in the fall of 1945, to 10,886 in 1948, to 7,213 in 1952, to 12,923 last fall. While these violent fluctuations in enrollment were going on, there was, of course, the commissioning of the Navy Pre-Flight School, the Institute of the Wartime Curricula for the various units of the ASTP, and the construction of temporary barracks for classrooms, offices, and married student housing for the post-war enrollment peak in the late 1940s. This was followed by a sharp decline in enrollment in the early 50s, and then for nearly 10 years, we have faced the constant preparation for yearly increases, which have brought us to last fall's total, and which promised to take the university to an enrollment of 19,000 in 1972. These figures will give you perspective on some of the problems with which we in the institution have had to cope, often on short notice, and often, too, with inadequate manpower and funds. In 1940, we had a full-time faculty of 316 and an unascertained number of part-time faculty. I think the record has not been kept, or at least I couldn't find it. In 1962, the full-time faculty had grown to 702, and in addition, we had 863 part-time people in teaching and research assignments. There have been further increases, of course, in the last 2 years. Research grants from outside the university have grown from the incredibly low figure of $58,000 in the year 1940-41 to $4,700,000 in 1962. Scholarships from outside funds have grown from approximately, again, an incredibly low figure of $7,000 in 1940-41 to $1,900,000 in 1962-63. Outside funds from all sources now amount to about $8 million annually. The total annual payroll of all parts of the university, every segment of the university in 1940-41 would not equal the payroll deductions on last year's university payroll. Total cash receipts and disbursements last year for all of the activities of the university were just under $60 million. On the other hand, state tax funds appropriated for operating purposes at the last legislative session totaled $25,800,000, or 33% of the money required annually for all operations, educational, hospitals, dormitories, athletics, and so on. But these are statistical changes. In brief, they may indicate, but they do not adequately reveal, the increasing complexity of the university and its programs. Many new and subtle factors are at work to make this a far different university from the one to which I returned in 1940. There is an increasing emphasis on excellence, both in the quality of the faculty and of the student body. There is the growth of specialization, particularly at the higher levels, as a necessary consequence of the increase in knowledge, and there's growth in research which has made that increase inevitable. You may have heard me repeat on other occasions what is often asserted by those qualified to know, and which our chairman referred to, that the amount of propositional knowledge now seems to double about every 10 years, and that within recent years it could be said that 90% of all of the scientists who had ever lived were then still alive, and this latter statement may still be true. The number of books of all kinds published in the English language almost doubled in the 4 years from 1959 to 1963. And I have a letter on my desk from the chairman of the library committee alerting me to some of the implications of this. Periodicals are increasing about 10% each year and are doubling in number about every 8 years. Fortune magazine has estimated that there may be as many as 100,000 technical journals in 60 languages, and that new journals are appearing at the rate of approximately 2 each day. There is increased mobility of faculty. World War II was the first great period of uprooting. Since then, the mobility of faculty has been sustained by the increase in opportunities for travel and study within our own country and overseas, and by international exchanges of professorships. In part, this mobility within our country is caused by the growth of new universities, and the demands for faculty in the face of increasing enrollments. But specialization and research also have had their effects. Once the faculty member's first and only loyalty was to teaching and to his institution. In some cases, it is now being eroded by a transfer of his loyalty to research and his subject matter field. And with the diminution, however slight, in his loyalty to the institution, the prospect of an easy movement to another institution is increased. Moreover, the demands of specialization are so great that increasingly the specialist often lacks the time and the inclination to devote himself to those general affairs of the university not related to his specialty. Time thus spent may cause him to lose ground in relation to his peers in the race for expertness and specialization. Consequently, the percentage of faculty with a university-wide point of view, and what is even more significant, in possession of the basic data necessary for such a view, tends to diminish. It is increasingly difficult to attract a specialist into administration, or to find at hand faculty who can give guidance and counsel on matters of university-wide concern, matters not specific to their field. On the other hand, society is a gainer by all of this. It is gaining enormously as a result of the increase of knowledge, and it will continue to gain, at least for the foreseeable future. Certainly, as we call the role of distinguished scholars and scientists in this university, names known to academicians in our country and around the world, we can take great pride in the rank and standing of our university. With my own eyes and ears, I have been witnesses to this in many places, and I trust that it will always be so. So far, we have looked to the past and the present. What of the future? I have no crystal ball. Furthermore, any forecasts I might have made in 1940, 1945, 1950, or even 1960 would have been made through a glass darkly. I have no reason to believe that I am more clairvoyant in 1964 than in those earlier years. But we can see factors which may affect the direction in which the university will move. One factor, obviously, is the pressure of increased enrollments upon all of our universities and colleges, and so, of course, upon our own. The pressure comes from two sources: a sharp increase in the number of births and an increasing awareness in young people of the need for higher education in our complex society. Even so, there are levels of ability. This would seem to suggest a hierarchy of educational institution for the several levels of ability. Indeed, this seems the only way by which all of the needs of all of the people can be met. Nevertheless, I despair, and I hope this is not the melancholy of age. I despair of this solution, and I despair because in the climate of opinion now prevailing in this country, it is historically unreasonable to suppose that an institution established for a special purpose will remain a special purpose institution. Our experience points quite clearly in the opposite direction. The Morrill Act passed by the Congress in 1862 encouraged the establishment of institutions for agriculture and the mechanic arts. A century later, this purpose has largely disappeared from the institutions so established, and technical institutes are now recommended for these purposes. The words agriculture and mechanic arts, once incorporated in their names, have been dropped, and now they announce that their colleges of liberal arts are the fastest growing colleges within the universities. This is a common phenomenon throughout the entire United States. Now, if in those institutions the humanities and social sciences need emphasis to balance the physical sciences and technology and agriculture, it would seem logical that agricultural colleges or departments should be established in universities of our type, so that our students too would get a balanced view of the world, especially a world in which population and food supplies are likely to be urgent problems for a long time to come. In the latter half of the 19th century, normal schools, later to become teachers' colleges, were established freely across the country to meet the rising demand for teachers in the public schools. Now these institutions have almost totally disappeared into state colleges and even into state universities, and the special purpose for which they were created no longer guides their development. We might very well raise the question, therefore, will this be the destiny of the junior college and the community college and of the technical institute? I don't see how our educational needs can be met without the establishment of these additional institutions. But when we establish one, are we establishing another potential Harvard or Stanford or Michigan or Iowa? And will society prosper by a surplus of complex universities and a shortage of special purpose institutions? Returning now from the general scene to SUI, we foresee, as I have mentioned, an enrollment of 19,000 in 1972. Shall we attempt to crowd the added 6,000 students into the already heavily congested East Campus? Or shall we be guided by the example of the Claremont Group and California at Santa Cruz and go beyond the present medical center to establish an additional complex for undergraduate education, yet one within easy access of the high-level facilities on the East Campus to the extent that such high-level facilities are needed? But wherever the students may be, on the East Side or the West Side, there will be need for additional superior faculty, for more educational, cultural, living, and recreational facilities, for a high-quality student body, and for expanded services to state and nation. The university will also be affected by the fact that increasingly it will live in an era of public relations, public support, and public service. It is not by accident that a half dozen of our great private universities are much in the media of mass communication. They know that the knowledge of them and awareness of them sent out in this way builds a broad base of public and private support. They are happy to be well regarded in London and Paris and New Delhi and Tokyo, but they know that their support comes from Washington and New York and the great corporations and private givers. In these days, private institutions receive public support. They have learned, as the land-grant institutions have learned, and as we need to learn, that these great institutions, public and private, have an obligation not only to teach students, not only to do research, but to contribute also to the cultural, economic, and social life of the society around them. This we do both on campus and in our extension services, as do Ames and Cedar Falls, and thereby hangs a problem. According to a recent press report, Governor Hughes has written the President of the Board of Regents suggesting a review and coordination of the extension services provided by the three state institutions of higher learning at Iowa City, Ames, and Cedar Falls. Apparently, he is concerned lest the technological changes in agriculture in this state lead the Iowa State Extension Services to duplicate what this university is doing already and to tempt it to move into other fields best served by this university. As a matter of fact, except by direct order of the regents and continued supervision by them, the regents have at their command no mechanism by which effective coordination can be achieved. Coordination otherwise is purely voluntary and is completely dependent upon good faith and goodwill. When it doesn't work, and sometimes it doesn't, It is because success presupposes a condition in which the institutions bury or blend their ambitions and work together for the common good. Historically, it was the need for coordination that was the cause of the abolition of the separate governing boards of the three institutions in 1909, and the creation in that same year of one joint board, the board that was first called the State Board of Education, and now in more recent years, the Board of Regents. True coordination of the three institutions will only be achieved if the regents have the means to effect it. One method would be a consolidation of the three universities into one university, as in North Carolina or California, with three campuses and a common president or chief executive officer possessing an adequate and effective staff for his office, a suggestion which I first made at the Joint Service Club meeting in this room in January 1959, and which I think I can make with better grace now, since I'm about to retire. In view of the confusion which now exists with respect to the names of the three institutions, this proposal is even more in order than it was when first presented. The adequate and effective staff to which I refer might also be created outside the institutions to serve the Board of Regents. They now have a finance committee to act as their agents in certain financial matters. What they do not have, what they lack, is a high-level staff of educational advisors independent of the several institutions and responsible either to the regents directly or to the regents through the chief executive officer of a consolidated university. The chief executive officer or chief of staff should have the competence of a first-class university president, and the other principal staff officers should have served for at least 10 years within a complex institution of higher learning and should be intimately acquainted with the procedures, attitudes, hopes, fears, devices, and prejudices of academic communities. Creating such a staff would not be cheap or easy, but unless the staff were of high caliber, it would be better not to be created. Mediocrity at this level will not do. Institutions having hundreds of faculty and thousands of students, having combined receipts and disbursements approaching $100 million annually, and programs vitally affecting the life of the state, should not be cheaply run. Too often in the past, this state has been penny wise and pound foolish, or to change the figure, it has strained at an economic gnat and swallowed an economic camel. To get at the problem of immediate concern to the governor and the regents, the regents might also consider the possibility of designating the state university as a land-grant institution with the authority in the regents to allocate extension funds, services, and functions between the two major institutions. And perhaps Cedar Falls might be included in a three-way arrangement. A number of states have more than one land-grant institution. In Massachusetts, for example, both MIT and the State University are land-grant institutions. Such a designation could be made by a simple act of the General Assembly. Such an act, coupled with the firm commitment by the regents to prevent costly duplication, would alleviate the proper concern of the governor and result in more effective service to all the people of Iowa. Now, the final factor which I wish to consider today is the explosion of knowledge, the organized attack upon our areas of ignorance, and the dramatic consequences of that attack. These consequences are both good and bad. The lethal effects of the bomb and the peaceful uses of atomic power. The beneficent curative powers of the wonder drugs and their occasional deleterious side effects. But there are other consequences as well of this explosion of knowledge. How are we to teach, and how are we to keep pace with the growing body of knowledge? What shall be taught, and how shall it be taught? Are we preparing our students to live in an age and a kind of society that is already passing? To what extent are the truths applicable to static societies of former centuries, applicable to the dynamic world in which we live. On a more intimate level, as the elementary and high schools improve the quality of the performance, and on this you may wish to read Time magazine currently out, as improve the quality of their performance as their curricula are revised, and concepts once reserved for college and university are moved into the high school curricula. How do the colleges and universities respond? How can we keep our programs articulated with the best high schools so that their graduates steadily progress upon entering here? What are the community and junior colleges doing in this regard, and are we geared to accept their transferees? In view of the indivisibility of knowledge and the fact that much significant research lies on the border between disciplines, do our present academic departments represent realistic subdivisions of the field of knowledge? Would we make the same divisions if we are starting now, knowing what we know? To what extent are our historians political scientists and our political scientists historians? Is Crane Brinton's The Lives of Talleyrand history, or is it political science? And how is Brinton himself to be classified? The dimension of this and other problems are dramatically revealed by the recently publicized plans of MIT, perhaps the most fascinating of all of our modern institutions of higher learning, to establish 5 new multi-storied centers of interdisciplinary research on their campus: aeronautics and astronautics, communication sciences, earth sciences, life sciences, and material science and engineering. And to the extent that MIT has moved into the humanities and the social sciences, it has not hesitated to depart from established patterns of thought. On the record, this university, SUI, has been an innovating university. Because of this, it has many times made real contributions to expanding fields of knowledge and to university growth and development far beyond those of older and richer universities. Upon the preservation of this vital spark, in my judgment, hangs the whole future of our university. No man of spirit can invest 23 years of his life in a great institution without pride in its past or without concern for its future. This is your university. It is the university of the state. But forgive me if I say that in a special sense, it is my university, mine as a student, mine as an alumnus, mine as a president. That it may ever grow in wisdom and stature is my earnest prayer.
Thank you, President Hancher. Yours was a thoughtful and a stirring message. I'm sure that all of us who are here today and anyone who might have heard your words will be better off and be benefited by them. I'm going to take a liberty, and on behalf of all the members of the service clubs here today, extend to you a warm welcome at any time to attend any of our service club functions. With those words, gentlemen, this meeting is adjourned.